troubles doing my live stream with the OBS, so I'm switching back over to my iPhone. I hope that's not an issue for our first session together. If you are part of this series, which means that you signed up for the Tuesday membership, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some fundamentals of music, answering questions, and then over a period of time, getting to know the people in our own group. Tuesdays are going to be where we're going to hang out, and essentially that means if you're part of this music community and you have enough time, become a member on Tuesday. Since you're here, you're a member. That makes me super, super happy for all of us. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking a little bit about how music foundations help us to describe our music and then to start writing music or doing music analyzation. We're going to add some vocabulary words in here. We're also going to be putting some concepts that you might not necessarily heard before. And we're also going to try to put some concepts in here that you have heard before. So what we would love to do is have group interaction and then see if we can have a couple people that are just going to be leaders of the group, if you will. Hopefully on here, there's not going to be any advertising or anybody kind of going to come in here and spam us. Welcome, members. I'm going to wait a minute, let people kind of trickle in here. We have 4 or 5 people that did sign up, so if you're hanging out today, that'd be amazing. Welcome, members. And remember to ask questions. And if you have a question, if you could, remember to ask those questions. Remember, if you have that question and you're hanging out in here and you're just kind of lurking, listen to everything that's going on. You could always go back and go over these in the future, but ask questions. That's how we kind of feed off of each other and we start to see what's going on and learn a little bit more about music theory. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hop over to the board right here. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my computer to work hand in hand. It said it couldn't have chat, which kind of defeats the purpose. I want to have chat. That's the whole purpose of getting in the comment section and chit chat with each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up so we can see the board and just go over some fundamentals of music theory, how I would start a lesson with every single student. If this is a little bit below where you're at, that's okay. Just view it as a refresher. And then since we have an hour, we're probably going to do about 25 minutes worth of just a lesson plan that is going to get increasingly difficult each week, and then eventually just answer more questions. So if you are hanging out in the comment section today and you are part of this members only music group on Tuesday for the Tuesday lessons, thank you very much. I do have some iReal Pros, this computer program that I've been using for quite a long time to write music in for practicing, meaning if you have a laptop or an iPad or an iPhone or something, it is something collectively that you could start writing music and doing some practice pad mechanisms on there. I'm going to show you what that looks like on my computer as soon as I have my OBS hooked up, probably next session, next Tuesday. And other than that, we're just going to jump over the board right now and start talking some music. Remember, if you have a question about anything that's transpiring, please ask those questions. Put it in the comment section. And without further ado, let's learn some music. Cool. So one thing I do have to say about music theory is something that a lot of people that take classes on music never really get to experience, which is music is somewhat of a interesting concept because it is just an amalgamation, meaning there isn't really one definitive way to do anything. There are many different ways that many people have done over a period of time that just have become what you would consider the norm or the normal or the consistency. The thing that we try to do is try to use music analyzation to see that some of the things that we do alter or they change. If you are a member of this channel or a subscriber rather, and you realize there are something like 13,000 videos, there's a lot of stuff from my point of view, music basics, music theories, music foundations. And what I'm really shooting for is getting everybody that joins this Tuesday members group to the point where they understand a little bit about everything that we're doing. Meaning, meaning when we're talking about notation, we have a firm understanding of what all the notes are. And when we're talking about dynamics, we have a firm understanding of what all the vocabulary words are and all the dynamics that we would put into sight reading. And then when we're working on ornamentals or we're working on accidentals, how do we use those to influence the flow of the music that we are writing? and or of the music that we are experiencing. So I've got a piano here. I'm going to do a couple different examples when we get into tonal stuff. And I also have the board, which is probably my favorite thing to go about right here. So just from the beginning of music basics, I don't know if there's anybody in the comment section right now, but if there was, I would pose this question. Hey, what is this called? When we have 5 lines, it's called a staff. And staff is the system onto which notes are placed on. So when I say, what happens when we put bars on the side of the staff, we immediately turn this staff into something called a measure. And that measure is the place where notes live. And it's really kind of cool because when you have notes on here, you can put a circle and it becomes your note. You can put those circles pretty much anywhere. A lot of circles have stems, so you can see them. If we don't have a stem on the circle, in music theory, it is called a whole note. Now, something that a lot of people miss because it's not really explained through the eyes like this, but when you have a whole note, that whole note, in and of itself, charismatically contains all of the beats in the measure. So one of the main things we learn to look at when we're talking about music is this. What type of note can we use to fill the space of the measure? Now, there are a couple things we want to talk about, like usually measures have a clef. This particular clef is called the G clef. Because when we utilize this note, we find ourselves being able to use the G line to know what this note is. When we say the treble clef is otherwise known as the G clef, we simply mean that the notes that we're going to be playing on this will be the G. And I find it very interesting too. Most of what we do and most of what we try to put on the staff is moving in something called step. These notes that we choose when seeing melodies or writing melodies and trying to see patterns have a very specific way of folding themselves out on the measure. Meaning, when you start writing music, it kind of follows a pattern and has a procedure. We're going to get into that when we talk about writing, but for today, we simply want to talk about the foundations. Now, there are other clefs. There are many other clefs, but the 2 main clefs that we use are called the treble clef, and then we have the bass clef, the basso. The bass clef is considered the F clef. And there's a lot of little funny mechanisms that I do for the younger ones that allow them to see these kind of things. But like when we do the treble clef, if I took away just the top part of that, it would look like a lowercase letter of the alphabet, right? It looks like a G. So that's one really good way to remember that every note that falls on this line, no matter what its duration is, will be a G note. Interestingly enough, right? So when we have these 2 notes here, we have ourselves doing the bass clef, doing the treble clef. When we take another staff and we put it below the treble clef, and then we connect it, we now call these 2 together the grand staff. Generally, when we're reading music for piano or any orchestra, you will have a treble and a bass clef. The bass clef is located on the 2nd line from the top, and the note that is on this line is the F. So every time you play it, it would give you one of those notes. Now, I'd like you to notice that the notes that I'm writing on one side of the clef have stems that go down and stems that go up. In music, anytime you have a note that is below the middle line of the clef or the staff, the stem goes down and on the left-hand side. Whenever you have a note that is below the clef or the middle line, the stem goes up on the right-hand side. This allows us to write notes that flow and that they're easily read on the staff. This note is the note that both of our notations are divided from. When we have the note of yeah, when we have that note right up top there, right here, just want to make sure it's sinking in here. When we have the note of the clef up there, we remind ourselves that the notes themselves can be changed and altered depending on what the duration of that note is. So for our notation of today, we have a whole note, and then we have a half note. After we have our whole note, and after we have our half note, we have quarter notes. And if you will, notice that the note head has been filled in. When we do this, we see that the half is different than the quarter. Now, all the terminology I'm giving right now is for the, I guess you would call the Western world, in the Americas and to the West. If you're in Britain and you're moving closer towards Middle East, these notations would still be called a whole, or we would have this be called a bereave. These are different notes. We would have minimum and then a quaver for the eighth notes here. So they have different notes depending on where you're at. But the truth is, these are all just subdivisions. After you get down here, we would call like those like semi-demi, semi-quavers, semi-demi, hemi-semi-quavers for stuff like 32, 64th notes. It becomes a real mouthful when you're thinking about it that way. But what I'd like to show you is that an eighth note can be viewed as just having a flag or a quaver off of the stem with a head filled in, and then you can attach those to another eighth note. The real interesting part about how these eighth notes works is there are 2 eighth notes inside of a quarter. So if you know that there are 4 quarters inside of a whole note, well then you'll be able to see that there are going to be 8 eighth notes inside of that whole note. When we keep going, we have eighth notes, but we tie them together and put a double beam. That double beam allows us to see that these eighth notes turn into something called 16th notes. And just like you would guess, there's going to be 16 of these. When we see that we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and those counting mechanisms don't quite work because 16th notes have a different way of counting. When we say whole note, we just say something along the lines of 1, 1, because we're following the pulse of the 4 quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. If you have a whole note in a measure of, like, let's say 6/8, that whole note will be worth the 6 beats. You don't need to put a whole note and a half note to exhibit it's taking the entire measure. When we're doing half notes, we can combine them to fit the measure. And because we're going through putting notes on top of our staff or our measure at this point to build durations of notes that form different types of feelings, they turn into something called melody or motifs, M-O-T. M-O-T-I-V-E, motifs or melodies. These individual notes come from this group of notes, which can be combined together and they can be altered. When we go through the process of seeing that all these different measures, all these different staffs can have different durations and different pitches, that's when music is developed. Meaning, if you have all these different 16th notes with these double beams, and then you see, I'm not going to draw them all, but the 32nd note has 3 beams. You know, 16ths, 32nds. The 64th would have 4 beams. This is how music is written in every program, on every staff, on every continent. When we have these durations of notation, we must also remember that there are durations of rests. Because even though in music we play a lot of notes, there also is the difference between the note being played, making a tone, or making a lack of a tone. For a whole note to have 4 beats and not play a pitch, we call that a whole note rest. When we flip that little bit box upside down, we call this a half note rest. When we have a little marker that looks like this, or sometimes you'll see it like this. I'm not the best drawer, so it really is hard for me to do that, but this one's called a quarter rest. When we have an 8th note rest, we use the single quaver or the flag to draw 1 single ball and then a stem. This is an 8th note. When we do a 16th note, we simply add a ball and a stem. 32nd note, 3. Therefore, a 32nd rest should have 3 balls. So on and so forth. 64th would have 4. 128th would have 5. So on and so forth. And these are the rests and the notation that we see on the staff. Choo! Choo! Excuse me. So, now that we've got the foundation of musical notes, there are some interesting things that we do on the staff and on the grand staff. When we're trying to excel at understanding musical theory concepts, the idea is not to bite off too much, to only bite off a bite-sized portion, and to enjoy working on the kind of concepts that make up basic music foundational theory. One of my favorite things to talk about, besides just how to see the notes on the staff, is how to practice the practice of practicing. So if you're a musician and you've never written a treble clef, it might be a little awkward. I'd suggest drawing several of them. They could have different feelings. You can come off to the side. You can even make it a little fancier. A little twirl, if you want. The whole idea that I try and show anybody that I'm teaching, it looks more like a circle that's going clockwise, and then a lowercase l, and then a lowercase j. When you do that, you form the motion of going to the right and then coming up to make a circle, following it and going up in a pattern of a lowercase cursive l, and then coming down with a little j. This will give you your treble clef, and I would suggest drawing these over and over and over and over again. They do have a little bit more of a artistic value to them, but it would take me forever to figure out how to do that. Something like this comes around, goes around through here, comes down, has a little ball. There's a little shadow or something on this one. I see a background at drawing. But looking at it actually looks kind of cool, because that's what a computer program would write, something along the lines of that. And then you'd have a little thicker thing over the top of here. Now, back in the day, composers and artists used to be really fancy with their drawing. I started reading some Frank Zappa stuff, and his pig scratch is amazing. So, this is probably the best treble clef I've ever drawn. And it's because I took 5 minutes to go for it. Other than that, you could also try and do your bass clef which involves colon, and then we're going to be having a big old ball coming off the side. Looks kind of like an ear, and then this side has a little bit more of a shadow to it. That's what the bass clef looks like. These are both the clefs. This is our G, and this is our F. And another really interesting way that I remember that was the F clef in the beginning is if you just simply draw this and connect two lines, it kind of looks like the letter F right there, doesn't it? F. So we practice drawing these on the staff so we get better at using our clefs, and then it helps us to understand what the notes are on the staff. So that's what we're just going to chit chat about right now. But I'd like to do it through the eyes of two different functions. One, I'd like to tell everybody that in the musical alphabet, there are only 7 notes. Those 7 notes are A, B, C, D, E, F, G. When we have our 7 notes of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we have the musical alphabet. Which means if we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we are playing the function of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or the solfege, or we want to count them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Or we want to do them with the Roman numeral system, which is something I'm going to show you and implement a little bit later on, which I hope you really, really love, which would be really cool if you do. It's what I use to describe these. And if you've never seen the Roman numeral system at all, this is kind of interesting. In Roman numerals, we would have an I representing 1. Now, any number that has that, like 2, would have I in it, but you'd have 2 I's. And the fact of the matter is, for this one, I drew it as 2 lowercase i's, and in music, that represents that you are playing a minor chord. We'll get to what that spelling is. This one is a third. 1, 2, 3. The third note in the key is C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, which has no flats and sharps, is called C major. C major has no sharps and flats, so all the notes in there are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. All of them are something called a natural. When we have natural notes, these natural notes the natural notes do not need to have the natural accidental for them to be a natural note. All of the notes in the key of C major are natural notes because there are no sharps and flats. When we go to our 4-scale degree, we draw it as an uppercase with an uppercase I and put a V, because in the Roman numeral system, the numerical letter for 5 is V. Hence, when we go to the 5th scale degree, we just put that V. The 6 is going to be a minor chord. Notice that the minor chords are the 2, 3, and the 6. They do not have the caps at the top over the tops of the pillars. So the columns themselves represent the Romanesque pantheon and all the different types of architecture they had there physically and geographically. Lastly, we have a note called the diminished. Whenever you write a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we must include the diminished sign. As a lowercase Roman numeral, it would dictate that it's a minor chord. And by putting the diminished, we are notating that we are flattening another note, which leads me to another thing. Another accidental that we have is called a flat. When we have a natural note, like this note, and we give it a pitch value, let's say we give it the pitch of 440. When we give it that pitch of 440, If we sharpen it, it goes up by a half step, or a semitone, meaning that the shortest distance in the Western air is called a minor second, represented by a lowercase m and a 2. When we have a half step, the distance between that frequency of 440 and that distance between the frequency of 444, 443, 444, it augments, meaning it raises in pitch. So when you sharpen something, it is augmenting. Whenever you utilize the flat, you are doing something called a diminishment. So augmenteds go up, they raise sharply, and then flats flatten the note and they drop in pitch or tone. So when we put a flat on it, it goes down in tone. The aforementioned minor second is the smallest increment in all of Western music. When we deal with Eastern music, there is a 12 tet system. There is a Lydian, like a Lydian dominant. It's called the Pythagorean tuning, which is tuned in Lydian. It's perfect fifths stacked upon each other. And then there's another tuning which is, it's called equal temperament, or it's more pure. Long story short is, all of these frequencies, like the aforementioned 440, which is an A note, has a frequency or a wavelength that's vibrating. This is a 1-to-1 ratio of the key or the note A. If we wanted a 2-to-1 ratio, we would add 440 to itself to get 880. Times 2, you know? That gives us 2 oscillations for every 1 oscillation, meaning the note isn't just the same note, A, 440, it's 880. It is an entire octave above. Notice how I only wrote 7 notes here, but the 8th note, V, I, is our C. This leads us to be able to know what all the notes are in any given key following a very, very, very simple mechanism. We have a whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone. This is called the root or the foundation or the tonic. This is called the subtonic because it's right next to C. Whenever you want to resolve something, sometimes you resolve it down to the 2 rather than the 1. It's not as deceptive as resolving to a 6, but gee golly whiz, when you go to the 2 rather than the 1, it deprives the listener of that resolution of it finally going back to its nice, happy tone. And when I say that, it's a funny observation. We're going to talk about that when we leave. This one's called the mediant. The mediant is the thing that determines whether a chord is major or minor. The 5 chord is called the dominant. And it's where all of these notes really want to go to build tension and then come back. It doesn't build an amazing amount of tension, but it builds just the right amount because the 1, the 3, and the 5 in any major key are called consonants. When we have something that's not the 1, 3, or 5, it's called the dissonant. It builds tension. Here's an example of a consonant. This is called a major third. Here's an example of a dissonance. This is called a major seventh. The 4 that we skipped over is called the subdominant. Because if you don't go to the dominant and you go to the subdominant, it still builds the right amount of tension. It's just not one of those notes inside of the 1-3-5 that's a consonant. It actually is a dissonance that causes a little tension. It's called a suspension, actually. Here's what it sounds like in G. The resolution factor that you heard is by going from a 1, a 4, and a 5, and then resolving back to the 3. Ah. With the other 2 consonant notes, it works quite well. After our subdominant, we get our 6, which is called the submediant. I'm not going to get too much into it right now, but the submedian is just like the median. When we start looking at other keys that are family chords or relative to our C major, we find ourselves being able to like split these in half and say, cool, if we've got like a tetrachord on one side, which if we have 4 notes, and then we have 4 notes over here, each one of these notes has a push and a pull from the other ones. So if we see the key of G, and we've got G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, we find ourselves having equal temperament on both sides of the measure, or this double staff. When we are double measure. When we have 4 notes here and 4 notes here, they fit quite well together as being the front part of the scale, and then the last part of the scale. Each one containing 3 notes which are not the prime or the tonic. These 3. These 3. So what we do is we realize that the smallest increment that's in music, a half step or a minor second, makes up the distances between all of these intervals. An interval being the distance aforementioned, like the major third, or the aforementioned major seventh. When we do an octave, that frequency that doubled itself, it's called a perfect eighth. If we do 2 octaves, not from just one A to another, but to another, that is called a compound octave, represented by the term C8. So if we said, what's the C8 from E4? You can say middle C, E4, octave, perfect eighth, compound octave. Our compound octave is an E6. And we're going to talk about what those actually mean on a piano. E1, C1, B2, D2. They're just different levels of where they are, the frequencies. And then lastly, my favorite here is called the lending, or the leading tone. This is a really great one. I'm looking forward to talking about this in future series here on Tuesdays. The whole idea behind this is to kind of use this tone to get to another key, or to use it as the third in the key of G, or if we're using it in the key of C as the B. We know that the A is going to be a major 6 and our D is going to be a major 2nd, because in a diatonic scale, which is what this is, we use the 3 consonant notes, C, E, and G, and then we use the dissonant notes of D, F, A, and B in a diatonic fashion. Now, diatonic means 7 notes for a scale. But the term diatonic, the reason why we call it a diatonic scale, the first 2 notes of each chord, and a chord must have 3 notes, determines whether a chord is major or minor. And notice how when I spelled out C major, the 1 is a major, uppercase. C, E, G. When we skip a letter and we write them out, we can look at our circle of fifths and go, there are no sharps and flats in the key of C major. The bottom note that is on the ledger line below the treble clef is C4. It is what we call middle C. When we have a diatonic scale and those notes go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, all of them are natural notes. None of them have sharps or flats. When we go up and find that this is our C note as well, this is called C5. Notice how this one's on a line. Notice how this one's on a space. If we continue to go up the staff, we find C, D, E, F. Here's our G clef. A. It's very good to know the middle line is the B. C, D, E. F is our top line. G is the space above. A is the first ledger line. B is the space after that. And then C6 is on another ledger line above the treble clef this time. So what I'm explaining to you right now is called the landmark series. Wish I could spell. The landmark series allows us to see where all the C naturals are, or depending on your key, where all the C's are. As we notice, it skips. So when we go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, C7 would be on a space, and then when we go up the series, we're going to have C8 on a line. If we were to go down and we were to connect the bass clef, we would put our 5 lines, connect the staves, so now it's a grand staff, and put our bass clef. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. Notice how C3 is on a space. When we go C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, C2 is on a line. That means that when we go down below, C goes to B, A, G, F, E, D, and then C1, the lowest of all the C's, will be here. C1, C2, C3, middle C, C5, C6, C7, and C8. This is called the landmark series. And the reason why it's interesting for the landmark series is when you read music, you're not really just reading all these crazy notes that are on top of a staff and trying to go, oh, well, what does this note mean? Oh my goodness, what does this note mean? What we're essentially doing is we are learning chords. Like when we took our tonic or our root or our foundation, skipped the major second and went to the major third, skipped the perfect fourth because it's a perfect interval, and then the perfect fifth, we have C, E, and G. Well, if we took C, E, and G right here, and we just took this note, skipped the line, we would also have a C, E, G. C, E, G. C, E, G. C, E, G. Each one of these is charismatic of a C, E, G, these 3 notes. And the reason why I know that is because I've written them out on the staff thousands of times. Each one of these is a great learning opportunity to know the notes on your stave. So here's what I have to tell you. When you're reading notes and notation, you're not really reading all the different notes going left and right. When they're stacked on each other like this is, you just play them like that. This would look like, I don't have enough fingers to do it, but it would look like all of our C's stacked on top of each other. And the reason why is we know where each one of our C's actually presides. It's the root of our chord, right? So the whole point of that is to know where your C's are. But when we're reading music and we're trying to place these, we do it in a multitude of different ways. We use the landmark series to understand where all the C notes are. When we know where all the C notes are, we start to utilize the staff. Let's say we're doing the treble clef here, and you start writing scales. Well, C major has no sharps and flats, meaning the distance between C to D in a diatonic scale is a major second, or a whole step, a whole tone. So when we write a C out, the next note that comes right above it, that D, is a major second away. If I didn't want it to be the D, and I wanted it to be the D flat or the C sharp, in this case, I can take this note and I can put a flat right before the note when you're reading it. When you're writing the note, the flats and sharps or the accidentals come after the letter. But on the staff, all of our accidentals come before. When I write this, this makes it look like I'm going from C to D flat. If I take it away, it goes back to a natural and becomes C to D. Which leads me to another beautiful idea. You have two types of scales in the Western era. One is called chromatic, and one is called diatonic. The diatonic is 7 notes that we just talked about. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And a chromatic scale utilizes those minor seconds. Now, a minor second on its own is a dissonance. But when you combine a C to C sharp and a C sharp to D, omit the C sharp or the D flat, which is enharmonically the same thing, you get a major second. Which means, if you take a minor second plus a minor second, you get a major second. A minor second plus a minor second plus a minor second equals a minor third. Second plus a second plus a second plus a second equals a major third. We are simply moving between tones. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. There is no whole step between E and F. So you simply go from the third scale degree to the fourth. We then go in between them. Well, when we start adding these major seconds and minor seconds together, you can realize that 7 minor seconds equal a perfect fifth, which is great. That helps you go, cool, C, D, E, F, G. The distance in minor seconds between a tonic and a perfect fifth is C to C sharp, D to D sharp, E to E sharp, which is F, F to F sharp, and then G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we have our note. Beautiful. So one of the really cool things we do in music while we're working on learning what the notes are on the stave or the staff is we put it in the concept of their distances or their intervals. Bearing in mind that when we write any of our notes, our chords are C, E, G for a major, D, F, A for a minor, E, G, B for a minor, F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C, E, and then finally B, D, and F. These are all the triads in the key of C major. Diatonically speaking, we have no sharps or flats. There are no minor seconds in here to influence. So if we wanted to take these notes and put them on a staff, what happens is we start creating chords that have different feelings. If I wanted to create a chord which is called a D6, I would include my C, E, G, and A. The reason why I write chords C, E, G, and then A from the bottom up is because all triads, whether they're extended with an extra note or there are triads, 1, 3, 5, they all are read from the bottom up. Meaning, to make a C major and then put a 6 on it, we are putting down our C note, our E note, our G note, and then our A note. Notice that when we have in music 2 notes which are right next to each other, The only two notes in all of music that touch each other on the staff are going to be the minor second and the major second. It's how your brain kind of realizes where your fingers are moving on a piano or on your instrument of choice or in vocally. So, not even talking about the C6 here. You could also call that C6 an A minor 7 because all of the same notes are being used. So they make different chords. The reason why is the key of C major and the key of A minor share a key signature. There are no sharps and flats in the key of C. When we view any major, we are talking about chord construction of a 1-3-5. Any minor, represented by a hyphen, we would talk about a 1 flat 3-5, where we have diminished or flattened the mediant. That gives you the tone from a happy sounding chord to a little bit of melancholy. We simply have switched the arrangement of where these notes have fallen. Meaning, when you have 3 minor seconds, and it's on top of 4 minor seconds, we find ourselves playing chords like this one is called an E minor if we're in the key of C, or if we're in the key of G, or if we're in the key of D. These are chord relativities, and we'll talk about it with our circle fifths. But the idea is when we have these notes, in the key of C, this is an E, this is a G, and this is a B. If I wanted to see this in a different key, maybe we would do it like in the key of A. A has 3 sharps. When we include that F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp, we get ourselves a good old-fashioned E, G sharp, and B. So, the whole concept of this is we want to be able to see the 3 chords that are inside of our major scale. Those 3 chords are derivatives of the 1-3-5. 1-3-5 is a major. 1 flat 3-5 is a minor. And then lastly, in a major scale, we have our diminished. The only 3 that you find in the major scale are these. There is one more chord. It is called an augmented, represented by a plus sign, and it's a 1-3 sharp 5. Here's what they all sound like. Of 2 build tension. They are wonderful to get away from those consonant notes that we aforementioned, the ones that feel really, really good. We want ones that feel a little bit weird and shaky. The whole point of music is to build tension, get away from that calm feeling, and then come back to it. So these are our basic chord constructions. Our basic chord constructions allow us to see that the 7 diatonic notes use do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. When we see this chromatic scale through the eyes of the diatonic, we have C to C sharp. This is a minor second. D sharp, minor second. E sharp is F, and F flat is E. Therefore, they're fine. In between here, we have F sharp. This is our sharp 4, augmented 4, so A4 or flat 5. I'm sure some of you players out there have heard of a chord called a flat 5 chord. When we go to the 5th, the dominant, we can sharpen that. This is called a augmented 5th, or it's called a minor 6th, because A is the major 6th. Perfect 5th, major 6th. This is the major 7th. The note in between the major 6th and the major 7th is the minor 7th. Now, the minor 7th and the major 7th are super important. Again, here's our P8, here's our major 7th, major 6th, perfect 5th, perfect 4th, major 3rd, major 2nd, and now we have this construction. Tonic, minor 2nd, major 2nd, minor 3rd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, augmented 4th or flat 5, or diminished 5th, you could call it that too, perfect 5th, augmented 5th, or diminished 6th, or minor 6th. Major 6th, minor 7 or augmented 6th or diminished 7th, and then major 7th, and then when we augment that we get an octave. This is how we describe a chromatic scale. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't show us what that circle of fifths was and why all this makes a little bit of sense in the beginning. That's what we're going to end on here today. If anybody does join this and they become a music member, I know that there are 5 people that signed up for this. Hopefully you're supporting the channel, and I appreciate that very much. So go back and watch these. I hope this was a good foundation. I do hope you make time on Tuesdays to join us from 12:20 to 1:20 Hawaiian Standard Time. I also listed all the other times that 12:20 is around the world. And then the takeaway is to write this all down in your music notebook. So after this, you most likely will never see me draw the 8th. I don't draw the 8th because the 8th does not have, scales don't have 8 notes. They have 7 notes. So that's why I draw it that way. So when we're doing this, the circle of fifths is a super important thing, and all I want us to do is to be able to draw it. Put 2 arrows, and I explain that this is fourths and this is fifths, meaning if you could count on your fingies and go C, D, E, F, G, G, A, B, C, D, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, C sharp. Those are all of our keys that have sharps. C has none. We already talked about that. There are no sharps and flats in the key of C, therefore nothing. When we do G major has 1 sharp. That first sharp is on the top line, so if you count up to it, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. When we go to D, it has 2 sharps. It has the F that's in the key of G, and now it has a C. F sharp, C sharp. When we go to A, there are 3 sharps. C has none, G has 1, it's F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. When we go to D, G, A, B, C, D, D has 2 sharps. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. What we're doing is every time we get a new sharp, we add it to the major 7th scale degree and we put a sharp on it. So when we go to D to A, we're going to include the sharp that was in the key of G, sharp that's in the key of D, and now we're going to put the G sharp, which is in the key of A. If you write these out and you just put the lettering down, you would have something along the lines of this. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. The F sharp goes to the 3rd scale degree. We add our new scale degree right here, which is the last note in this key. It's going to be a C for the D. And then we fill the rest in. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Or don't worry about that. Just write out all the letters. The next one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A. See how G goes to here, D goes to there, A goes to here? It follows that mechanism. You can write all the letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then go back and say, what was the sharp in the key of C? None. Cool. Here we are. A minor is C major. What was the sharp in the key of G? F sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's the sharp in the key of D? C sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what's the note right in front of A? Tonic major 7. Boom. G sharp. When we go through this process, you see that E has 4 sharps, F, C, G, and D. So when we write them out on the stave, we do the key of G, key of D, key of A, and then finally, key of E. Every time that you do this, you are training your brain to visualize and to see the clef, to see the notes, to see the intervals, to see which keys have what, and to see the correlations. When we go through E, F, G, A, B, C, D, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, After that, F sharp, C sharp, D sharp. I'm sorry. My brain's broken. F, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp. So you have the preference of just being able to write these as they come, or you could just memorize all your sharps and flats because you've done it so many times that you know intrinsically that F sharp has 6 sharps. And then when we write out all these, the reason why you know that B had 5 is because you've written these over and over and over again. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, and then E sharp. That is F sharp. And then lastly, when we get to C sharp, it has all of them. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and then we're going to go hit our E sharp. Hoorah! That is 7 sharps. That is the key of C sharp. And then little things like how many sharps and flats are there in the key of C? There are none. Well, how many sharps and flats are in the key of C sharp, or how many flats in C flat? There are 7. Whenever we do this, you can say, how many sharps are in the key of G? When we say there is 1 sharp in the key of G, that sharp is F sharp, you can then take all those notes and say, how many notes are there in a diatonic scale? There are 7. How many sharps in the key of G? There is 1. How many flats are there in the key of G flat? There are 6. When you write out your sharps, you can also write out your flats. F, G, A, B flat. B flat goes to E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, and C flat. Each one of these, same. F major has 1 flat. That flat is B flat. B flat has 2 flats. One of them is B flat, the next one is E flat. When I'm teaching new students how to sight read or how to use the circle fifths, I don't really show them how to use the circle flats. I only intuitively show them how to do the circle sharps, and then I show them the mechanism unto which allows them to see each one of these keys is very, very closely related to the key before it. B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat gives us A flat. When we go to D flat, we write the same stave, correctamundo. Yeah. Then we have a B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and then we go down. What's our next? B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat. Boom. Whenever you see that, you know intuitively that's the key of D flat. G flat, as we just mentioned, there are 7 notes in the scale. If G major has 1 sharp, there are 6 flats in the key of G flat. Only note in the key of G flat that does not have a flat is the one note in the key of G that had a sharp, the F. So we say B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, and the next note we hit is a C flat. The only note missing there is the B. That's incorrect. F. And then lastly, C flat has them all. B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. We're going to go to our G flat, hit our C flat, and lastly, what are you going to do? You betcha. You do your F flat. Hey, this is how you spell out all of your circle. This is how you take the circle of fifths. This is how you look at the chords, the keys, the mechanisms, and then you start to derive what the notes are. By writing out all of these functions every single time that you play anything, you can find yourself writing some music. You can find yourself analyzing music. You could find yourself just doing ear training. You could find yourself doing vocal training or oral skills. And I guarantee that when you start sight reading just a little bit, and that when you start writing out your circle of fourths, the flats, and then your circle of fifths, the sharps. And then you look up at the top here and realize that you have different names for different intervals, different positions. You will eventually be able to see those on your own instrument and then start to make sense of it. And then the last thing I want to leave us with is whenever you're learning an instrument, regardless of what that instrument is, let's say that you're doing a voice and you want to train your voice. We look at it through the circle of FIFTHS, and it helps us to find positions. So if we were to play something like C major, anywhere you play a C, that's when you're going to get your tonic. Anytime you put a note over the top of C that's in a white key, it will work of some fashion. We talked about triads. We talked about intervals. We talked about major and minor thirds, or a major second, or a minor second. One of the coolest things is to see that a note above, like a fifth above, is a fourth below. It will always lead to some sort of studying mechanism, and it will always give you the opportunity to understand that what we learned on paper or on the board doing the circle of fifths, the landmark series of where the notes are on the staff, the grand staff, treble and bass, and then seeing them on your own instrument. If you practice 5 minutes a day with one concept, you will get better at this, I swear. I am your personal music guru. I am here to help you. Thank you for being a part of the music series here. If you have questions, put them in the comment section. I will get to them. And please, by all means, join us on Tuesdays from 12:20 to 1:20 Hawaiian Standard Time. If you're not familiar with what that time is in your own time zone, you can check the description below in any of these. I think it'll show it. Other than that, please ask questions and share this. Invite other people to join your music membership group. Tuesdays, 12:20 to 1:20 Hawaiian Standard Time. Thank you very much. Aloha.